Let me just take a moment and introduce myself. I'm Shujaa. I was a prisoner in California, and we just recently looked at the film talking about the California prison history, which doesn't truly reflect all our history, because it just wasn't California history that George Jackson and we was involved in. It was a history of our movement. It was a history of the Black Panther Party. I went to prison at the age... I'm sorry. I went to prison at the age of 18 years old in 1969, and when I got out in 1982. I joined the prison movement. I was inspired by it. It's a great honor first for me to be here with people who inspired me as a young man. I grew up in gangs, and I developed as a consequence of Black Panthers and the BLA. And at the age of 18, I went off to prison. And when I went to prison, I couldn't read or write. And it was there in prison that I met the people who educated me, people like George Jackson. Personally, I never met George Jackson. When George Jackson was killed, I was in Soledad State Prison in 1971, and I can remember it just like it was yesterday. And what really inspired our movement and what gave me the determination, it was one day in 1970, long before we heard about George Jackson and the Soledad brothers. I think at the beginning of the film where you see 3 blacks who was killed. And that was a day that created our movement, in my opinion, and in many people who was a part of that movement. They opened up an exercise yard in Soledad, Owen in 1970. I think it was January or February the 13th. And they fired 3 shots. 3 black men was murdered. 1 white was wounded. He got hit by a ricochet bullet. And from that day on, after that, you heard about a case called the Soledad Brothers. That was the beginning of a movement. That was the beginning of George Jackson. That was the beginning of the Soledad 7. Many of you don't know about the Soledad 7. George had his case, they was the Soledad 3. Then right after that, another guard was murdered, and it was called the Soledad 7. Those brothers' cases went to preliminary hearing, and their cases was excluded. And right after that, there was many other cases. For example, I had been in prison for over 5 years in 1973. And it was there in 73 when I was accused of killing a guard, and they say I was a George Jackson. I never denied the fact that I was a Jackson. I never denied the fact that I was in a prison movement. They always tried to say I was a member and a leader in a movement called the Black Guerrilla Family, which was an underground movement. I always denied that I was in the Black Guerrilla Family. But I tell you this, brother, I'm here today because of the Black Guerrilla Family. Amen. In 1973, when I was accused, and when them guards beat me down, and for one day, that particular day, I remember November 27th, for one day, black people seen power. That particular day, I seen all the brutal guards that had beaten down prisoners took to the run. Blacks rose up like never before. And all I can remember, the guards was hollering and running back and getting more security. And from what I was told, it was 2 or 3 black men who created all of that reality that was going on that particular day. But to make a long story short, it was myself and Legene Allen who was accused. And for the next 9 years, I fought for my life. I went through 4 long trials, being a Jacksonist and standing up for what I believe in. After my 2nd trial, I was convicted. I was sentenced to die December 8th in San Quentin gas chamber. And I stayed on San Quentin's death row. When I was sentenced to die, all I could ever remember, when I went to death row, I remember the spirit of our people, and I remember when they sentenced me to die, and I can't go through the process how they do it, because it still bothers me today. Amen. But I do remember. They asked me, did I have anything to say? And all I can remember was the spirit of people like George, the spirit of W.L. Nolan, the spirit of Qatari Jeffrey Garland, and the spirit of the BLA peoples. When George was assassinated, they responded. And when I went to death row, I was comfortable where I went. And many people say, wasn't you afraid? I was frightened, but I was afraid. I had good days and bad days. Some days I didn't feel anything because I thought I was finished. But it was due to spirit and determination of dedicated people why I'm here today. It was some young children. When I went to death row, said, Shujaa, when I went to death row, they said, Mr. Graham said, we're going to get you out. And I said to myself at that time, I said, what can some young children do against the power of the state? My friends, little did I know. Those young children went out and organized a community. And I stayed on death row for 4 years. And I can remember like yesterday, they had a little television they would give us. And I was getting weak. I grew old. I was 19 when I got in. And I was in my 30s, and I've seen the television. And I've been accused of over 5 or 6 murders and assaults since I've been in prison. And I've always been able to come out alive. And I thought I was finished, and I was looking at the television, and I seen my picture, and I said, what the hell I've done now? But it said the Supreme Court have overturned the conviction of 2 black militants who was convicted and condemned to death. And I thought I was getting out right away. And for the next 2 years, I had to go through 2 more trials. And it wasn't until 1982 that I was released.